Are you ready to get casual? Grab your favorite adult beverage or combustible plant and join us for our roundtable TTRPG discussion. Oh yeah, it's time for Casual Friday. And now, here are your hosts.
And here are those hosts. Hello, welcome, how are you? We are the Landlocked Warlocks. This is Casual Friday. I am GM Jim from Wizards and Wordslingers, and over here is...
I am Ryan Doyle, and I am slightly sick, but we're going to power through and get casual AF. And down there,
I'm Brad Wolf from Diarden.
Hey, so, hello, welcome our early joiners, Twin Steel, Phil. How you guys doing? So let me tell you about what we're going to talk about on the show today. We've got a few news items to discuss. We're going to talk about internet gambling. Hasbro's getting in on it. We're going to talk about a one-shot that we all played in that Ryan ran that was very interesting. It was a very well-written, well-run one-shot, and we're going to do a little post-mortem on that. I've got a quick show and tell. These guys don't even know about it. It's a surprise to them. Then we're going to talk about D&D getting into the pinball game. Little tendrils, spidery tendrils going far and wide, it seems. Then we're going to talk about the Monster Manual. I'm going to show you some art from it. We are going to talk about new dragons in the Monster Manual. And I don't think we're going to have a roundtable discussion today. Probably not. We probably won't get to the main topic, which as always is Chapter 2 of the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. That book that came out last year. All right, so the first thing that's up for discussion in the news, hey there, how you doing? Hey Fred, welcome. The first item that's up for discussion in the news is that Hasbro is licensing out D&D to some internet gambling companies, and I know that in the last 15 years, at least in America, that as gambling gets legalized more and more places, it is everywhere. You cannot watch a sporting event in America without being drowned in BetMGM and DraftKings and all the other ones, ads for them, and it's everywhere. And I didn't really realize the extent of how much you can do it online until recently. I've watched a lot of content about people losing millions and millions of dollars. So I don't know. What do you guys think about this? D&D is licensing out, so you'll see Tiamat branded slot machines at casinos and crap like that.
I mean, if they're going to be at casinos, like, why not? Right? I saw Dungeons and Discourses video on this, which made it sound like it was going to be really pervasive. But like after looking into it, my understanding is like they're just licensing this to companies that already make, these slot machine style, virtual card game style, units. So, I mean, from a business point of view, I'm sure Hasbro's looking at like, hey, everybody's doing this. Why don't we do it? I don't see what the alarm is. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing that.
I mean, this seems like the perfectly engineered thing to get the hackles up in my leftist heart and yell about all of that. But like, the problem isn't that it's Tiamat instead of a cherry or something. Like Hasbro's a big mega corporation. They're going to continue to license D&D to everything. Maybe there's some bad associations that are formed, but ultimately it's more money for their shareholders, and there's a chance, a slim one, but there's a chance this is more exposure for the hobby and making it more ubiquitous. And maybe someone loses thousands of dollars on their phone and then is looking for like maybe a less expensive way to spend their time and maybe have like a human connection, and then they could come play D&D.
Yeah. Hey, Nacho, we are going to talk about monsters real quick. We got a couple of things to chat about before we get there. Yeah, Twin Steel, I think I agree with you. I have serious ethical problems with gambling in general, especially internet gambling. The only thing that I don't like about this is that Dungeons and Dragons is played by lots of young people. And this isn't as bad as like Bluey themed slot machines or SpongeBob SquarePants roulette, you know,
Louis
but
would
it
never.
is it is something that could be more attractive to children than the, I don't know, whatever the slot machines are now online. I don't gamble online. I wouldn't know. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know. Do you guys have anything else to say about that? I think we could probably move on.
As a reformed, before we were playing D&D on game night, we were playing Texas Hold'em and blackjack and all sorts of other stuff. And like, if you're gonna gamble, try to have some form of strategy or control over it. Like, I've never understood putting money into a slot machine. There's strategies where like, oh, if it's here in the casino and more people can see it, then it's more likely to pay out or whatever. You're talking about a phone in a vacuum. Like, there is no way I would sink money into that. But I'm not addicted to gambling, and a ton of people are. So, How to RPG is making a very good point that there is a degree of gambling baked into D&D in the first place. It is very close to craps.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as far as I would rather have Hasbro licensing their product for things like this than trying to squeeze microtransactions or, publish splat books that we don't need. I'd rather have them, I'd rather have D&D baloney and D&D Converse and D&D, slot machines than them trying to squeeze money out of their existing customers with some sort of, blind box randomization in the new VTT or microtransactions or any of that stuff.
Wait for it.
So, so hopefully, this is a way they can make money without it coming out of my pocket. That's the cynic in me, right?
That's a fair point.
I do a little bit of sports betting now that it's legal in my state. So, so I guess I don't have a significant problem with gambling. But of course, I've never known anybody that was seriously affected by a gambling addiction. So I don't know what that's like for folks.
What? MCU romaine lettuce? There was branded lettuce?
It got recalled.
Huh.
That's funny. I wasn't joking about the D&D bologna. There was actually D&D bologna. So you can have a whole themed meal with some D&D bologna and some MCU lettuce, like nerd lunch.
I think D&D Converse is not a bad idea. Just like different colors for different chromatic dragons. Like, I was just saying how much I miss LA Lights. So slap some LEDs in those bad boys. I'm there.
Yeah, you can totally customize your Converse now, and you can customize D&D Converse.
Oh, it's a thing. Okay.
Yeah, legit. Yeah, I looked into it. They're a little more expensive than I wanted to pay, but I had fun at least designing my shoes online, even though I didn't click purchase.
It's like Hero Forge.
Yeah, it's like Hero Forge.
Yep. Yeah. I have many unpurchased Hero Forge creations. All right. So next on the agenda is, you watching probably know that we are Casual Friday. This is Casual Friday, and we are the Landlocked Warlocks, but we are also part of a larger group collective called the One Page One Shot Club. And earlier this week, not only did we welcome a new member, who I'm not going to tell you who that is, because you're just going to have to wait. We welcomed a new member, but we played a one-shot on Monday. It was not technically a one-page one-shot. We cheated a little bit, but we very much kept the game in the spirit of a one-pager, in that Ryan ran The Waking of Willoughby Hall in a very rules-light, rules-quick way. There were hardly any rules. It was mostly rulings. There wasn't even a whole lot of dice rolled. But so I thought we could do a little post-mortem on that. Ryan, do you want to tell us what you want to tell us about The Waking of Willoughby Hall? Sure.
There's going to be a video on this soon, because I highly recommend Ben Milton's The Waking of Willoughby Hall. It is, in theory, it's a one-shot. Could have stretched our game much longer than we did. It's got a lot of cool levers where I can basically turn it into almost like a convention game. There's like a timer aspect to it, and it's very heavily exploration based. There's a lot of stuff in a lot of rooms that the players can interact with, do things I'm not expecting them to do. It's kind of part and parcel of our crew also, but it's built into the module. I've run that 4 times. I've run that 4 times, and every time the party splits and people end up in different places, and I end up defaulting to dungeon turns. And I can't think of another module that does that consistently. And I think that sounds like a nightmare to some people listening right now, perhaps, but it goes to show how exploration based it is, and like combat averse maybe it is. It's a different mode of playing. It's much more in the old school way of things. In theory, I was running old school essentials, which is like kind of baseline BX D&D in a lot of ways, but we quickly threw out 80%, 90% of the rules and just ran with it to keep the spirit of the One Page One Shot Club alive. And it was glorious chaos. I'm interested in what you guys thought of it, because it's definitely a different experience coming from like a 5e Pathfinder crunchy perspective.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Of course, I've played a fair amount of Shadow Dark and grew up playing BX and AD&D, so I kind of knew what to expect as far as old school essentials rule set and Ben Milton's design, because I follow him and I paid attention to a lot of his stuff over the years. So it was everything I expected it to be. It was great. I loved it. I like, as a player, I definitely like that old school feel, the dungeon crawly feel, especially when it leans more towards the fun and zany side, which the OSE stuff tends to do. I'm personally not a huge fan of the Darkest Dungeon style, oh my god, we're gonna die around every corner, old school approach. I do more enjoy the quirky, zany, version of old school. So this was right up my alley. Like, I had a lot of fun with it.
Ryan, why do you think that this module encourages splitting the party?
I've been reflecting on that since I'm 4 for 4. And I think in part, maybe it's how I run it, by like going into a dungeon turn type thing. Everybody knows that whatever they do, they're getting their turn in the spotlight. So I don't have to go to the spotlight. The spotlight's following me wherever I go. So maybe it is something that I am doing, but I think it does a very good job of if you sat there and jaquazed out, is it how many different routes you can take through that dungeon. Like, you guys had a very rich, full experience for 3 hours and explored less than half. Let's put it that way. I mean, more than a third, less than half of that space. And yeah, there's rooms that I've never had somebody go to in there. There's rooms that immediately there's 3 choices, and one of them is to go to the next floor. So at every decision point, there's branches. There's no one right thing to do. The story itself kind of leans into that too. I'm like, all right, you guys are here in a dungeon. There's different ways, obviously, to set up the plot hooks, but we were trying to run it pretty fast. It's not part of a longer campaign. So boom, you're in the first room of the dungeon, and another party comes running in, being chased by a giant. So it's already frenetic, chaotic. There's so many different ways to go. That party split because of decisions that you guys made. You shut the door in their face immediately, which I thought was great. And it was, it's just beautiful chaos, and it really, I think, can help a lot of dungeon masters who are more concerned about being in control and making sure that they hit their plot points, stick the landing, whatever it may be. You cannot do that here. You have to adapt and improvise and kind of let go of the handlebars and let the players steer what's going on. And it is scary at first for some, but it is a way more fun experience as a game master, at least as a one-off.
Yeah. I think my experience of it was like there were like really interesting things. Like every room had something interesting going on. So like at one point, I think it was my character was the first one to split from the party, and I was just gonna try to like, you know, cut off the other adventurers at the at the pass. Like I was just gonna like try to circle around and come out the other side. But then as soon as I ran through a room, it was like it had this really cool shit in it. I'm like, oh, I gotta stop and see what this is. So I got totally distracted from my original agenda. And then once I split off, I think, Mike intentionally was like, oh, that's what we're doing now. So he split off. And then it was just chaos from there. And it was just really fun.
Our group is just naturally very chaotic. And we've done enough of these together that even though they're all one-shots and they're all one-pages and they're all different rules and different characters, that we kind of know what to expect from each other for the most part now. And we know how to move the story in one chaotic funnel. I wouldn't say direction. I would say more like a area.
This one was a shotgun. It was like borderline Gonzo to answer some of the. It could have been more. Nah, I guess it was pretty Gonzo. It hangs together. Like my hesitation with like Gonzo stuff. It's like this room has nothing to do with the room that's the next door over. And I personally don't like that. There is a cohesive narrative at play in the present moment of the game and in the history of the location, and those two things interact in very interesting ways. It's a very well thought out, well connected adventure, but it is pretty wacky. It's also old school in the sense that like it is deadly. Like you guys, there wasn't a ton of combat, but there was one combat that was like unwinnable. Essentially, there was no way you guys were gonna win that fight, and somebody died. Spoiler alert.
Yep. Yeah. And I think our group is just really good at yes-anding everybody else in the group. So even though like we all came in with like very chaotic, intentions, right? Or we stumbled upon chaotic intentions. We were able to notice what each other were trying to do, and eventually we bring it back to that. Like we find a way to get the party back together. We find a way to accomplish what the new player wanted to accomplish, right? So even though we each had our own little thing, I think with the kind of the magic of our group is we do try to yes and each other. So we're not like actively contradicting each other, even if we have different agendas from each other, if that makes sense.
Indeed.
It makes perfect sense. To me, that's the measure of like an experienced or like advanced D&D player. It's not, whoa, you built this crazy character and put up like monster damage in your Nova abilities. Like, no, you engaged with the person sitting next to you. You're not just waiting for your turn to talk to the dungeon master. You're actually participating and yes-ending with the other characters that the players brought. And for me, that's like the gold. That's the gold standard.
Yeah. So we got to move on because these guys watching they want us to talk about the monster manual, which we're going to get to very soon. I promise. Just got a couple more quick things. First, I have a surprise show and tell. I'm going to take a sip of water. That's live, folks. All right. So, surprise show and tell, and this is mostly for Brad. So, goddamn, I got to wait for Brad to get back up here. Brad, what are you doing?
What is happening?
Pull your socks up later, dude.
I've got a busted ankle and I'm wearing this stupid ankle brace. It was annoying me. I had to take it off.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So here is my surprise show and tell.
Ooh.
I bought Robotech the Role-Playing Game by Kevin Symbieta.
Nice.
And this is 110-page role-playing. 110 pages. Says Robotech the Role-Playing Game. Palladium Books presents. Now here's what's funny about this book. There's a couple things that are interesting I want to point out. But one, this is the second time I've owned this book. The first time I owned this book, I was 13 years old, and it didn't make any sense at all. Now I know why it didn't make sense, because it's an expansion. This book assumed, and nowhere in here does it say that it's an expansion. Nowhere does it say you need the basic Palladium RPG. But there's one line in a part where it says, we assume you're already familiar with the basic Palladium rules. The company that made Rifts and made Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I can't think of what they made. A few other games that all use the same Palladium rule set. Well, there's one half a sentence where it says you need that book because it doesn't tell you how to resolve dice. It tells you how to like build a character with skills. It tells you how to do hand-to-hand combat, but it doesn't tell you how to resolve dice. And here's the really amusing thing is that it doesn't tell you how to resolve dice, but there is an entire page about mechanics for alcoholism and drug addiction, withdrawal, and recovery. Can you see? Is that the right page? No, that's the wrong page. I can't see where that. I don't know if you can read that, but yeah, there's like tables for rolling about withdrawal effects, the percent chance likelihood you're gonna get back on the drug each week you're withdrawing, the effects of what happens to you when you're intoxicated, when you're coming down from alcohol. A whole page on alcoholism and drug addiction. The 80s were wild, man. RPGs were different back then, right?
Yeah.
Wizards and Warp Drives just said. Phil says alcoholism a major theme of Robotech. Well, I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Do you guys have any thoughts on 80s RPGs or Robotech, the role-playing game?
I never got to play the Robotech role-playing game. We played BattleTech, which was, the skirmish war game, where FASA, the company that made that game, stole a bunch of the robot designs from Robotech. And there's a whole history there. You can search on the internet and find out all that chicanery. But we did play the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle role-playing game back in the day. And that was fun. Making up mutant street vigilantes.
Yeah, I'll say this thing about the system in here, how it describes how you get your skills, is you roll 3d6. But then if you get a 16, 17, or 18, you can add an additional d6, and you only get any kind of benefits from your stats if you have a 16 or higher. So your stats are meaningless if they're 15 or lower. They don't come into play in the rest of the game. That's weird. Why do it that way? And it implies that it's roll under percentage in a lot of places. I kind of put that together, even though it doesn't explain it. Why have 3d6 stats if you're a percent roll under a system? It's just baffling. I don't understand.
Yeah, and maybe that's why we didn't play it.
Maybe why. I don't know. I got it when I was 13 and I was like, this doesn't feel like Robotech. I just want to read about Rick Hunter doing cool stuff. Anyway, so moving on, one more little quick news item before we get to the Monster Manual. And that was last week. I think it was last Friday, actually, right around showtime. So we didn't get the scoop. But there is now a Dungeons & Dragons pinball machine, and it costs $7,000. Just $7,000. And in researching this, I learned that pinball machines are very, very different from the last time I cared about pinball, or not cared, but even paid any attention. Pinball, this D&D pinball machine cost $7,000. I watched a video of them demoing it. It has save games. It has QR codes you can scan with your phone to check your character. You build a character, you level up the character, you fight monsters. And there are challenges, there are storylines, there's voice acting by, it said, Michael Dorn plays the voice of this red dragon. And over here is a gelatinous cube, and they showed him hitting the gelatinous cube, and your balls get stuck in the gelatinous cube if you shoot it up there. Or the dragon can breathe fire and unleash 60 of these balls. I didn't know pinball machines could do any of this stuff, and they were talking about, this one is almost as high-tech as our tie-in Venom pinball machine. I didn't even know they had a Venom pinball machine, or that one apparently cost $10,000 because it can do more than this one. And I don't know. When was the last time you guys touched a pinball machine?
It's been years. Yeah, it's been years. But yeah, I was surprised to see what all the new pinball machines could do, because I heard about this and checked it out because I figured it'd be relevant to us talking today. And yeah, it's like there's a digital screen and like all this sort of stuff. Like it's definitely a lot different than just, pinball when I was a kid.
It's what. So I live in a pinball city, which I did not know when I moved here. But a buddy of mine is in 2 pinball leagues, and
Oh, wow.
I played pinball the last couple of years. There's also like a few like get drunk and play arcade games, grown ups, and here's a Nashville hot chicken sandwich place. I gravitate towards that sort of stuff. So I played pinball a few times, and he's like, "All right, so what you want to do is you want to hit that and activate this mode, and then you're going to try to get it over here." It's like my strategy is don't let the ball stop, don't lose, don't die. I didn't know you could. I just recently learned you could be good at pinball machines and that they did different stuff, and there's like legit professional level. There's league play. So it's wild. I always get really like juiced up about something I didn't know existed, that like someone is so deep down this rabbit hole of interest that it's just like they can rap about it forever. I always love that. So I was maybe one of the first to know because my buddy sent me. He's like, "Hey man, D&D pinball machine, let's go," because he's got the inside lane on all things pinball.
That's wild. Yeah, it's crazy. Like I know a guy who, at least for a while, was flirting with professional cornhole. Like it's crazy. Like what you can become a pro at. It's wild.
Professional cornhole. That is very surprising. I don't know. Any other thoughts on D&D pinball here? We're ready to move on to what the people really came to see.
Yeah,
I'm way more excited about pinball than slot machines.
That's a good point. Yeah, and this brings me back to my original point. Like Hasbro, more power to you. Go make your crazy money by licensing D&D for all this stuff. D&D backpacks, D&D pinball, D&D. I don't know, hats and mugs and Converse and whatever. More power to you. Just don't bring microtransactions and other things to try to squeeze money out of your existing fan base, because clearly we don't like that.
Yeah.
Spaceballs the lunchbox.
The kids love this one. They're making apparently they're making a new Spaceballs. Josh Gad has been pitching Mel Brooks on it. Mel Brooks can barely walk or stand or talk, but he's producing making a new Spaceballs.
I heard about that. It's crazy.
Anyway, so let's move on to talking about the main thing we came here to talk about, probably. So Ernest Hemingway once said that there are only 3 true sports: bullfighting, mountaineering, and motor car racing, and all the rest are merely games. And one of those games that I like to play is Dungeons and Dragons, and they've come out with a new monster manual for 2025. You like that segue? I worked on that.
Incredible.
I actually thought about that. Thank you. They are making a new Naked Gun with Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson, and Jorma Taccone from Lonely Island is directing, or Kiva from Lonely Island is directing. Anyway, we're going to talk about the new monster manual. Now, some YouTubers apparently already have copies of it. None of us are that cool that we got an advanced copy. But we did all see an article on D&D Beyond posted this week and a couple of videos about the monster manual. And I think we all have a lot of thoughts on that. So how do you guys want to do this? I've just got a bunch of bullet points about it. We could go through the article. We could just each take turns saying stuff.
Hit us with your first couple bullet points and we can respond.
Sure. So the first thing that I noticed, this was an overall thought, is that in the 2 videos this week, they didn't say anything about monster building. There was nothing about monster building in the DMG. So, but maybe that's coming in a separate video, because I assume they're probably going to do that same schedule of like videos Tuesday, Thursday, or Wednesday, Thursday from now until release. They did, one on the monster manual and one on dragons. So I expect probably next week we'll get a video about giants or vampires. They'll do a big category and then have a few more. The internet is for anyone. It's for people that Some odds, indeed. They also said there were 80 more monsters than in the 2014 monster manual, and all monsters are purely alphabetical now, not by category. So the gelatinous cube is under G. It's no longer under O sub G for ooze sub gelatinous cube. These are all these are great things. Alphabetical and more monsters. I don't know. Do you guys want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to be like cynical here and kind of push back on some of these things, I think the alphabetical order is good for new DMs. As an experienced DM, I prefer it. The monsters categorized by type, but that's just my preference. But they did say that they have lists where they'll show you a list of all the fiends together and all the oozes together, so that if you're trying to build a theme around devils, or you're trying to build a theme around demons or oozes or monstrosities or whatever, you could reference the list. So I guess that's a way to kind of win-win. And they said 80 new monsters, but they also said that they were doing monster families, which I really like the idea of, like what Jeremy Crawford called monster families, where they, instead of having 2 different vampire types, there's now like 4 or 5 different vampire types. I like that as a DM, to be able to customize the monster for the challenge rating, for the level of your players and all that sort of stuff. But then I wonder, then, is that being counted in the 80 new monsters, right? Because you plussed up vampires from 2 different types to 4 different types. Is that 2 of the 80, right? Or are we getting 80 brand new monsters? That was a question I had when they said those things.
Yeah, I'm in a similar place of like, I'm on the uptick of the hype train right now, and like, ooh, I've been burned before, but supposedly this is the biggest monster manual ever, like quantitatively, 500 plus. They keep saying. So yeah, I mean, I am optimistic about that being true in a way that doesn't make me angry.
Yeah, one thing Fred just says here, it's a 4E monster manual vibe, and I agree. One thing is they now said out loud that bloodied triggers stuff just like it did in 4E, and this is I like this a lot. This is good. Bloodied is a good condition. Being able to have monsters get additional abilities or do more damage against bloodied PCs is great. It's a little bit of new variety. So I definitely approve of that. One thing they stressed a few times was that monsters now come with better overall instructions for how to run them at the table. And I wrote this down because I liked this quote. They said, quote, "You shouldn't have to look in a different book for how to run a monster." And I feel like that's probably a reference to Keith Amon, and is the monsters know what they're doing? Because if you read the monster manual, it doesn't tell you how to run all the monsters in 2014. You read Keith Amon's blog or his book, and he is laser focused on telling you how to. And he has this great philosophy of, or not philosophy, but a methodology, I guess, is that you look at the monster's 6 core stats, and that can tell you all you need to know about how to run a monster. Basically, like high con, high strength, that's a brute. High dexterity, low con, that's a stick and move skirmisher. And like he has all these different ways of reading the stat block, and that was sorely lacking from the monster manual. And I think they're trying to make up for the fact that blogs like What the Monsters Know What They're Doing had to exist. There was a vacuum created by the previous monster manual.
And that's one thing from 4E I would have been happy to see, is like monster roles, positions like that, like the whatever, I forget now, the skirmisher, the sniper. I think that goes a long way to telling you, okay, what is this monster like in combat, and what is this monster like in combat with other monster types too. And that we're not getting. As far as I know.
Yeah, I'm hopeful, but I'm also kind of skeptical on that. Like how much detail are they going to give us on these monsters? Like I like the idea that they're saying there's advice on how to run these monsters, and that they focus on the art depicting the monster doing stuff, and the art shows them interacting with adventurers to help you have a better idea of how to use this monster in your game. I like all that they said. I'm just not sure how much there is going, there will actually be of that in the book, since we're getting more monsters in a larger font. All those things are going into it. How much room do they really have to explain that? And they did say they were backing off the lore a little bit. While at the same time they're saying, we want you to understand how to use these monsters in a Dungeons and Dragons world. They were basically saying, but we're also not going to cram a whole bunch of lore in there so you feel like you have to know the lore in order to run the monster. So that sounds good. I'm just curious how they strike that balance, because I feel like that's a tight window to hit.
What I was hearing, Tales from Elsewhere, what's up? Is kind of talking about it. And it felt like mostly in the context of the art. They were kind of like indicating that it was a thought process throughout the book of like monsters in context, right? So less about how the drow went underground millennia ago, and more like, okay, if you see a drow, what is the context? What are they like? What is the hierarchy there? So I am hopeful for that. I think we are going to see a lot more of that. I think we're not going to see enough to be satisfied. I think the monster manual I'm going to be making up in my brain until I have it in my hand is going to be way cooler than the actual physical object, which is a problem I often deal with.
I think in 2014 they made a mistake in their lore, in that sometimes the lore would give you clues for how to run the monster, and sometimes it didn't have that at all. So you never knew if reading the lore was going to be worthwhile for a creature. So less of that, I think, is probably, I don't know, some people won't like that, but I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think they were right when they said that sometimes too much lore kind of locks you in. Like there's definitely times where I use gnolls far less often in 5th edition than I used in previous editions, because gnolls were so steeped in the Yunagu lore, right? You couldn't just grab gnolls, or at least I didn't feel like I could just grab gnolls and write a new, story for why these gnolls are here. Like I feel like I can do that with orcs, because the orc lore, they basically worship the god Grumsh, right? So you could always just say, well, here's a group of orcs that worship a different deity, right? And the fact they even did that in the Essentials kit, the adventure that comes with the Essentials kit, the orcs in that adventure worship a god of thunder. I forget the name of that god.
Ooh, that Thunderboar is cool. I forget his name, but that's a cool guy.
Yeah. So the Talos, I think, is the name of that god.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. So like I was already doing that before that Essentials kit came out, but that kind of validated my, my take on orcs, so that you could use orcs in any way and just switch up the deity that they worship, and that would give your orcs a different theme and different agendas, different motivations. Where I don't know why, but I didn't feel like the gnolls were as easy to do that with, because they were so steeped in Yunago lore.
And they're so specific. There was a hyena and it drank the blood, and it's very like, well, I don't know if there would be hyenas in this biome. And now I got to describe a whole demon battle. Like,
yeah, it was almost easier to take the gnoll stat blocks and reflavor them as some other type of beastman.
Yeah. So moving on, the next thing I noted was that they said that every creature, or I don't know if they said every, but lots of creatures now are going to have default treasure, which I like, because, when you run a game, sometimes you have that player who's going to loot every single corpse, and you can only say you find a bag with 5 copper pieces in it so many times, or you find a treasure map or whatever, especially if they roll well, and you feel like you gotta give them something. But it's just a lot better if This knoll has a toothpick and one silver piece, and that's just the default. And then so players will figure out, okay, I can stop searching the knolls now.
Yeah, I
what
think
they are.
I think from reading the Dungeon Master's Guide and comments they made in the Dungeon Master Guide videos, that it's just going to be a category of treasure. You know how in the new DM's guide, there's like the categories of treasure, and I think the new monster stat block is just going to say that category.
One art.
Yeah. So they're like a the Rakshasa, right? Might have like, 2 art and 1, ring or something like that. Or, I forget the categories now, but, something like that,
Gotcha. That's still better. At least
Yeah.
you have a quick table you can roll on.
It gives you a lead somewhere to go with it.
The next thing in my notes is under a section I put under the heading stuff that will really piss people off, or really piss off certain people. There are male and female hags. And succubi and incubi are no longer tied specifically to gender. Like you can have any gender, succubi or incubi. And there's those 2 little quick things, but I was like, that's gonna make some people really mad for crazy reasons.
Yeah, people get their feelings hurt. I did think it was interesting that they said that they focused on the lore of the succubus and incubus. The how do they say it? The incubus focuses more on like interfering with your dreams, where the succubus is more about interacting with you on the material plane. So I thought that would lead to some interesting encounters that you could go back and forth between, a dreamscape and then the material plane, and facing the same monster in a different way.
Also, monsters include a line about where you would meet them, which reminded me of the old, I guess it was AD&D stat, percent in layer.
Yeah.
It may have been even older than AD&D, but I do remember that percent in layer. And then this one was a pretty big one. When they started talking about legendary creatures in CR, it got a little bit vague, and I'm not quite sure I followed everything they said, but this is the way I understand it. 2014 CR was based on that monster using the most optimal option every round. Like, they're going to use their most powerful thing round 1. They're going to try to use the most powerful thing again round 2. If they can't, they'll use their second most powerful thing. And CR is based on that, based on creatures always hitting as hard as they possibly can. But they said now, they've implied that all legendary actions, and maybe even all monster actions, I wasn't clear on that part, are balanced with each other. So you don't have to pick the Dragon's Breath weapon in round 1. It can do something else that is comparable to that. And that's what CR is based around now. Did I completely get that wrong, or what did you guys take away from that part?
It wasn't crystal clear, but it did sound like they have balanced the monsters internally. Some of the time it sounded like everything hits harder. They fixed CR by making things have more hit points and doing more damage, which was required for me to get on board with this system, period. But it did seem like there's no longer a best sequence of events. And I hope that means everything's equally good and not, well, there's a lot less buttons to push now. Or maybe both, but...
Yeah, so if I was interpreting what they were saying about like there's a best way to run a 2014 monster based on the way CR was designed. So like I just pulled up the Oni, for example. So the Oni can cast Cone of Cold, right? That's definitely going to be its most damaging attack, but it can only do it once a day. So you're going to open with Cone of Cold, soften up the targets, right? And then the next best thing would be, the multi-attack, 2 attacks with the glaive, clearly because the glaive does more damage than their claw attacks. And then you would probably, maybe do the glaive again, and then maybe if you're still alive on your 4th turn, they're going to cast Sleep to take out anybody who's low on hit points, right? Something like that would be kind of my interpretation. That that based on the way they were interpreting challenge rating back then, there would be an optimal way to run the monster. And if that's the case, why didn't they ever tell us that? Why did we go 10 years without knowing that?
Yes.
Why did we have to figure that out on our own? But either way, I hope they are fixing it the way they said they are. So I guess that means now that maybe instead of Cone of Cold, it might have a different spell that doesn't do quite as much damage. And then the claw attacks and the glaive attacks would do very similar damage. So that way, no matter which of the 3 attacks you chose, you're going to kind of come out, with a similar baseline of damage. I mean, is that how you guys are interpreting that?
Yeah, I'm kind of in a wait and see position, but I feel like, all right, the Archmage doesn't need a dagger, like stuff like that. I think could be part of it too. It is pretty, from what I've seen. I like the art. I am surprised at how much I do actually like the idea of a male hag. I didn't think that I would have any sort of response. Like, oh, that's weird. I was like, oh yeah, I could work with that.
Yeah, not just your aunties, it's your uncles. Yeah, creepy, ugly uncle. Yeah. So I'm very curious to see how that CR rebalancing, especially among higher CR creatures, shakes out. I really want to get my hands on this book. So some other things they said that more creatures have more explicit instructions in them. Like on the Mimic page, it gives you examples of what they can turn into. They said they tried to make vampires, quote, more terrifying with lots of new variants. They brought back the Goblin Hexer from 4E and a new Goblin Minion for very low CR. I wonder if it's a CR 0 creature.
Yeah, that was interesting. I liked the idea, like I said before, of like the monster families, as they kept calling them. The male hag and the white band. I like the idea of the monster families because I think it's a good way to help DMs use the type of monster you want to use despite the player's level, right? Like they talked about the idea, like the Death Knight has like knights that serve it, right? So you can use, if you want that Death Knight 5, you can use one of these lower level, aspiring Death Knights. They talked about the different types of vampires. So, the vampire spawn was going to get plussed up a little bit. So if you want to use a vampire at for 3rd level characters, you could use the vampire spawn as your vampire bad guy. I love that Bone Devil, by the way. You're scrolling past right now.
Yeah. Chat's talking about how it's PG-13 or 12, which I hear you, but like I don't know. That's towing the line. That goes pretty hard.
Yeah. But yeah, so I like the idea of the monster families, and it saves you time as a DM because like one of the examples they gave is there's a new ghast that's a spell casting ghast. And I've certainly done that when I needed a low level, boss monster. I would take the ghast or the white, or like the cult fanatic, which is like CR2, or the druid that's CR2. I would take those stat blocks in the CR2, CR3 range and turn them into spellcasters, or change up the spells that they cast in their stat block in order to create a big bad for level 2 characters or something like that, right? So the fact that I have to do less of that work is a good thing, and hopefully these monster families allow DMs to do that without having to do a lot of like adjustments on the fly or prep time, of customizing your monsters.
Wait, this says not Karlach, and I don't believe it. That is 100% Karlach. Prior to getting the little vents installed, but that's definitely Karlach.
I like the fact that goblins are Fey now. They've been so in my headcanon for quite some time. But it seems like there's a lot fewer humanoids out there. Kobolds are now officially dragons.
Mm-hmm. That's going to bother some people.
That's people are gonna be upset for like min max reasons, but like or also for like they should be dog guys. They should just bring out like new dog guys at this point, I think, and call it like Kobold with a C or something. I don't know how do you fix that problem, but I like the idea. There were too many humanoids, and like favorite enemy humanoid was clearly OP, and yeah, I don't know. It got a little crowded in that category, and it's much more interesting to me, especially for the goblins, to be these like labyrinth, Feywild, chaotic trickstery guys. Like I'm here for that.
This Horn Devil art is beautiful. This looks like a photograph. This is incredible. Anyway, moving on with some more notes. I was a little bit confused that some creatures seem to have legendary actions and some creatures have multiple reactions. And I don't know why there's both. I don't get that. Did that make sense to anyone? Why it's two different ways?
From looking at the green dragon that we saw, I think they did away with legendary actions and put those into the actions, right?
Some creatures do have legendary actions, though. They showed new stat blocks. And some creatures have multiple reactions. They seem like the same thing to me.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was the design intent, is that they were like that the idea of legendary actions was supposed to give you multiple reactions, and you could use, because you had the legendary action tag, you could use your reactions to do any of your actions on a player's turn, right? So I think they were basically just using the same mechanics but squeezing it tighter into the stat block instead of having a whole separate category of legendary action.
Yeah, I don't know, because they, in their Dragons video, which we're going to talk more about in a minute, they did say that there's no more lair actions, that they just gave, the lair actions are written into the dragon's stat block, and the dragon gets more legendary actions and more legendary resistances when they're in their lair.
Yeah, so like the one of the dragon stat blocks I saw, it was the gold dragon stat block that I think it popped up on social media today. The gold dragon stat block says it gets, I think, 4 legendary actions, but 5 in its lair. But I think the legendary actions just allow you to use the actions as a reaction on somebody else's turn.
Oh,
right?
I see what you mean.
So mechanically it's the same, but there's not a separate category of here's your actions, here's your legendary actions, and here's your layer actions. So they took the cool stuff that were the layer actions and just put those into the actions, and got rid of the legendary actions that were basically make an extra claw attack, make an extra tail attack, that kind of stuff. So the idea being that all the cool shit is right there in the actions, and you can do it, on your turn or on the player's turn. And if you're in your layer, you just get to do more of it.
Yeah. Fred's writer, legendary actions and reaction monsters will confuse people. I don't know. I'm hoping they'll explain the difference at some point, because I don't get it. There was one other note that about this, the first monster manual video, that I thought was very interesting. Also, I wanted to stop on this art because I love this guy. I don't know, is that Orcus? I don't know who that is, but that is intense.
That's Bebop.
Bebop, yeah.
It might be Baphomet. Is that Baphomet? Is that a Minotaur?
It could be.
Oh.
They said that each monster has a subtitle now, which is 2 to 3 words of flavor or quick summary. They said they called it the quote TLDR of the monster. Like they gave one example for a goblin that was like a couple of words, like chaotic, blah blah blah. And they said, I haven't seen this in any of these advanced stat blocks that they said every stat block has one, but I haven't seen it on any of these stat blocks. So it's weird that like, is it only in the physical book? Maybe because why would it not be on the stat blocks on D&D Beyond? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe they were saving that, or maybe that was a late addition. I don't know. It does say because I was just looking at it. One of the free adventures they put out that has new stat blocks in it. There's an asterisk in it, and those say that they're based on the new design, but they're subject to change.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the versions that we're seeing on D&D Beyond are not the full and complete versions. They might still adjust them and tweak them slightly in the final version.
Right.
So, because all sorts of crazy stuff happens. I mean, Ryan, you've put a book together, right? When you're doing design and layout, you're like, oh crap, these monsters don't fit here. How are we going to fit this monster here and that monster there? Well, what can we do? Can we change the name of the monster? Can we add a name to the monster so we can put it in a different section of the book to make it all fit? Like, there's all sorts of crazy stuff you do to try to squeeze stuff on a page.
Especially when you're talking about like a little boondoggle line that you think is cool, but like shifts everything over a half an inch. And like, yeah, I'm sure they went back and forth about, because at one point they're kind of like hashtags, but no, they're not hashtags. They're not actually tags. It did seem very ornamental, the little descriptors that they added. So I could see that coming in and out of the out of the design process.
Yeah, they. I think Jeremy Crawford was quick to point that out. That when they called them hashtags, they were doing it almost metaphorically, and then like Jeremy Crawford realized we better clarify that they're not literal hashtags.
Look at that.
That would be weird.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, they don't do anything. Don't worry, guys.
those were my notes on the first video. Do you guys have any other takeaways from it you want to talk about before we move on to dragons?
Overall, I liked everything they said. I don't know how they're going to do it all to a level of satisfaction. But I think that's where we're at as fans. I think we're always at that point as fans. Like, it's very rare that, you get something you're waiting for and it's exactly what you want. It's everything you want. Like, I can think of, movies I've seen and books I've read that are like, when I heard it was coming out, I was super stoked. And then it comes out and it's like, oh, it was good, but it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. Right. I think we're always going to have that feeling from WotC products.
And I think that's why this hobby is so appealing to people like us who have like an active imagination. It's like all of the cool ideas that my mind is generating, like there is almost inevitably going to be a letdown when I actually do get this thing in my hands. But this is one of very few occasions where I can implement those ideas into my experience of this hobby, this game, this art. All of those cool ideas are translatable to my game session, where like you can't go change the contents of a book or a movie. Anything right now, like you saw a picture of the hag and like that dude's handing out candy in a van. Wait, that's Hansel and Gretel. Like, it doesn't matter if that's in the Monster Manual book or not. You're going to be able to use it still.
Yeah, and I think they mentioned that in one of the videos too, that like this is supposed to spark your imagination. This is supposed to, incite you to daydream about this stuff and think about this stuff. And if Wizards of the Coast was able to put out perfect products, then we wouldn't be here, right, on YouTube talking about all this stuff, right? Like, most of our audience are either, game designers, YouTube content creators, right? Like, we're here in this hobby space because we want to take the existing product and make it better, put a different spin on it, and then share it with people who are into it and get excited by it, like us, right? So, I think that's their main job, right? Is to give us the clay to work with. Just give us a good base game so that we can take it and run with it in whatever crazy direction we're going to do, right?
Yeah. And hearing them acknowledge that from the jump, that all of these are, it's not the quote from the book that like you're going to really enjoy if you read it, but if you didn't, then it's just like, what does this mean? Better to have these like little encapsulations of context and potential story that are going to expand and give you ideas. Because like I never use the DMG to start campaign design or session design. Like 9 times out of 10, I reach for the monster manual. That's my beginning point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a great quote from Twin Steel.
Mm-hmm.
No use striving for the perfect game, only the perfect game session. Yeah, 100%.
Indeed. All right, so moving on. Here's just a little intermission. Let's go out to the lobby and get ourselves a snack. If you're, you guys can take off. I can handle the rest of the show. You're fine. Go ahead. Come on, get out of here. You guys have put in a long day. Go ahead and clock out. What was I talking about? Yes, Landlocked Warlocks is a YouTube channel, and you should go subscribe to it. If you noticed, I'm not streaming this on my channel today, but we're always going to be streaming Landlocked Warlocks every Friday. And next Friday, we're going to do this show, and then right after the show, we're going to be debuting an actual play. We're going to premiere it. I'm going to be there in the chat, hanging out, chatting with everybody. These guys may be in and out of the chat. So that'll be like right after the show next week. We're going to debut Sexy Battle Wizards, run by this guy right down here, featuring us and a couple other of our friends in a very, very dark, chaotic, grisly noir of it turned out to be a very noir-ish kind of game, even though I don't think we intended that from the outside. It's dark, but it's also very funny.
It's a little sexy, but it's more battle and wizard.
Yeah. All right, so moving on, there was a second video about the Monster Manual that came out this week, specifically about dragons. One of the first things they said, I thought this was a good quote. They said that dragons needed to, quote, bring the hurt. They said that most adult and ancient dragons have spellcasting now. I think quite a lot of them had it before. I don't know how big of a change this is.
It was like optional.
Yeah. And one of the thing that we already mentioned this, but lair actions are now included in the stat block as legendary actions. I'm not sure how I feel about that, because it was kind of nice in combat having the lair action on a different initiative count. You know, when the lair action is on initiative count 20, everybody knows it's coming up. But if it's just the dragon's turn or a legendary action, I don't know. I kind of like the reliability of that lair action. You know, like every 6 seconds, this lair is going to pop off and do something. And so you can plan that based on where you are in initiative. I don't know. What do you guys think about those things so far?
I think you still... I'm sorry, Brad, go.
I might be saying the exact same thing you were, Ryan. I think you could still do it because they're telling you the monster gets extra layer actions, extra legendary actions when they're in their layer, right? So you could just put that extra one at the top of the order. Is that what you were going to say, Ryan?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty like you can just... I just do that anyway, especially when I'm making a monster into like when I'm making my own boss monster. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter if it came to you or not. Like count 20, something happens. I really like we kind of elided over like abilities kicking in when a PC is bloodied, but I also think there's a real opportunity for when the monster is bloodied, something gets triggered, and maybe that is akin to a legendary lair action. Doesn't happen on their turn, but like after they get hit and drop to half hit points, boom, like 2-phase boss fight starts, or it's just a one-time ability.
Who doesn't want to make their dragon go Super Saiyan?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of the bloody condition kicking in like a new level of aggressiveness to the monster, or even like your super elusive monsters, once they're bloodied, they might do a misty step or some sort of cunning action kind of thing to sneak away, right? You could do it that way too, right? The monster gets bloody, they get more aggressive, or the monster gets bloodied and they run away, to kind of incite a chase or something like that. You know, there's different things you could do with that bloody condition, and I hope they do a good job with that.
Fred asks a good question here. Would DM have enough brain power to run a dragon that has that many abilities and cast spells? Well, the lair actions, they're trying to make it more simple. And I think, I don't know, I haven't seen the book yet, but we will know once we can see the size of the stat blocks compared to 2014, whether or not it's going to be harder or whether it's just going to be an adjustment period for a while you get used to running the new dragon.
Yeah, the gold dragon stat block that I saw today, it was definitely shorter. Of course, they didn't show you the spell list, but it showed you the full stat block down to where it says, and they've had the following spell abilities, right? And then I'm assuming that the rest of the stat block would have a list of those spells. But yeah, if you're not running in D&D Beyond, and you can't just click on those spells from the stat block and go right to the spell description, you're still faced with that old problem of, well, they only cast Cone of Cold, so now I have to go look up Cone of Cold, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're running in D&D Beyond, that's just a click away. But I'll be curious because they also, in Mordenkainen's multiverse book, right? They put the spell abilities in the list of actions, right? In order to keep you from having to look up those spells. So they just gave spell-like abilities in the monster's actions. So if they do that, right, it might make the stat block longer if their different spells are listed there, but it's all there. You don't have to flip pages or click a hyperlink or anything like that.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to put in those spell-like abilities in a CR2 creature stat block or CR5 creature when they don't have a whole lot of other stuff. But like with an ancient blue dragon that already has 16 other things they can do, if they listed out all those spells, like spell-like abilities, it would be a tube. There's no way they could fit that on one page, right? So they have to just condense the spells into a tiny little spot and be like, do all this other stuff. But also, if you are a finicky DM who wants exact control over your monster, here's the spells it can do as well.
Yeah. But if you're doing away with legendary actions, I mean, you're not doing away with them. The mechanics are still there, but you're not having a separate list of legendary actions, and you're not having a separate list of layer actions. So everything's now listed in the action section, right?
No, they specifically have legendary actions that are their own sections. I definitely saw that.
Okay. So I was just thinking that would save you space, and then you would have space to put the spells in there. I don't know. I'll be curious to see how they lay it out.
I don't know. So we already talked about kobolds. They're dragons now, which means no charm person on that kobold. My body, my choice. All right. Another thing they were talking about wormlings and how to make them more terrifying. And there was a quote, I don't know who the guy who was not Jeremy Crawford, the one with the really bad vocal fry. He said that wormlings, he said this quote I really liked. It said, quote, "A crocodile with wings and it's smarter than you," describing a wormling, which is a very succinct and terrifying sentence you could say at the table when it's like you see something flying. It's a crocodile with wings. And it also is wearing glasses because it's super smart.
That's why I wear these. I don't even need them. So many times in my dungeon master career, I've been okay. This thing it's only medium. No big deal. It's like this thing is your size. Like this dragon is the size of you. This lizard thing is it's not small. Oh, it's a worm. Like it's cute. No, it's as big as you are, and that's the baby.
Yeah, I can't remember which monster it was. Oh yeah, I was describing Aarakocra, right? Just last night in our D&D session, the players were scouting an area before they got up to the dungeon, right? And I described these large bird-like creatures in the distance. They're far enough away they couldn't tell they were humanoid bird-like creatures. They were just large bird-like creatures. And they're like large as in like game size category large? Like, are they medium bird-like creatures? I mean, they're big for a bird, but they're medium size category, right? Like we had like a brief little hiatus where we clarified exactly how big these creatures were. So that's kind of a problem you run into with the size descriptions, because medium doesn't sound very big, right? But if you're talking about a spider, a medium-sized spider, if you saw a medium-sized spider, D&D medium-sized spider in real life, you'd freak the hell out.
Yeah.
And
if I saw a tiny spider is bigger than any spider you've ever seen, except for maybe some of our Australian friends.
Big a bird, are you? Well, speaking of monster sizes, there was something they said in this video that I'm not sure if I knew or not, that there is no size ceiling for gargantuan monsters. I don't
think that was ever explicit, because gargantuan is what is like X by X squared, 4 by 4, 5 by 5.
That's what I thought, but they were saying gargantuan monsters can be any size, and I was like, as soon as they said that, I was like, did I know that? I don't know if I knew that or not. I don't think I've ever heard that before. I always assumed they were a static size, and that's just gargantuan.
Yeah, I don't remember if I knew that in the sense of rules as written, but I definitely played it that way. I did a Kraken encounter one time where I took it was a picture of the Kraken from the Disney Atlantis movie. I took a picture of that and I blew it up multiple times and then cut out the component parts. So I built this 2D model of this Kraken that was probably like 18 inches long and like 12 inches wide. And then so the encounter happened on that instead of a battle mat. So they were actually on the Kraken, and and it, and I had it like pinned together, so like the claws I can move them. And nice. So they would run to the end of the claw to get close to the face, and then I'd just like move his claw away from his body.
Nice. That's dope. The last couple times I've run a Kraken, it's just tentacles. It's like, how big is this thing? It's like, it's a Kraken. You don't know. here's another tentacle 40, 50, 60 feet away.
Yeah, unfortunately we don't have the art, but they showed the art in the video of a dragon turtle. Compared to, that's when they were talking about the size ceiling, they were showing it compared to the pirate ship, was clearly many, many times larger than the pirate ship. There was one other note I had here about dragons, is that they said that basically 2014, pretty much every dragon, once they get to, I think, just adult, they get frightening presence. But
it does different stuff now.
Yeah, exactly. Now they have, some dragons still have frightful presence, but the red dragon has commanding presence. And I think it was a white dragon has a banishing presence, where they could just, as an action, banish you.
The gold dragon, yeah.
Gold dragon, yeah.
Yeah, because it's lawful good. It doesn't want to fight, so just like, go away.
Yeah, which is I'm all for more variety. They kept talking about how experienced players are going to be surprised and thrilled and delighted anew that at fighting all of these monsters that will feel brand new to them.
Yeah, and I forget it was either the brass or the bronze dragon, whichever is the trickster one. It had a giggle effect. So it would just, instead of like a fear effect, it would just make you laugh.
Oh.
Just like AoE Tasha's hideous laughter. And
right, yeah.
Interesting.
I thought that was cool.
I like, because it is disappointing to me, or it was disappointing to me, that like dragons all kind of feel a little samey. It's just like, what shape? Oh, this one does the line and this one does the cone.
Right.
They should be the most badass thing in the game. And I've done a lot of work to make them so. But I like the idea that that's kind of baked in now.
Yeah, I do like the fact that they're adding the spell casting back in, and they're trying to give each dragon a little more flavor. So like fighting a green dragon should feel different than a black dragon, and definitely different than the gold dragon. I think that's good design. and it seems like they're trying to create that variety without making the stat block unmanageable. So I'm curious to see where they land on that. Like, do they stick the landing or not?
You know, they said every single monster has had a tune-up. They said every single creature in the book had some kind of tune-up from their 2014 version, if one existed back then. I'm very curious to see how that bears out. You know, I've seen some of the stat blocks I've seen already look like an improvement. The monsters seem to hit harder. They have generally better 2-hit bonuses, which is really all you need to do. You want to have your monsters hit harder. Just in Tier 1, give them all a +2 to hit. Tier 2, give them all a +3. Tier 3, give them all a +5. Tier 4, give them all a +8. Monsters hit more often than players get hurt. They take it serious.
Yeah.
Monsters miss. That's the best thing, you know, that can happen for a PC. So have the monsters hit more often. I don't know. I'm not running 2024 D&D, but if I do, that's my theory, is I'll just give the monsters a bonus to hit. If they hit more often, then it will more balance out and be more challenge.
Yeah. What I already do with 5th edition is I use the static damage, and then I roll a dice on top of it. Right. So
that's a good one.
So that way they hit harder, right? They do a little more damage. The static damage creates a higher floor, and then, you know, rolling a die on top of that creates variability, so the players don't know exactly how much damage it's going to do every turn. So that's what I've been doing for like the last few years of 5th edition. So if I need to do that, I'll just continue to do that with the new edition, and that, you know, just makes them hit a little bit harder. The other thing I do with monsters, you know, I like giving them spell-like abilities, especially in making it a recharge. You know, so hit the players really hard on the first turn, freaks them out, and then you're not doing as much damage on additional turns. You know, we've used the Oni as an example twice already. You know, hitting the players with that Cone of Cold on the first turn, you know, makes the Oni pretty freaking intimidating, right? But they don't do it again. But the players take that big chunk of damage and they're like, oh crap, are we in over our heads? And that's the kind of feeling you want. And then, you know, if it's a recharge ability, then there's that, you know, that kind of tease as you're describing, you know, that dragon trying to summon up that breath weapon again, right? You give that description as the dragon, like, you know, grunts and snarls as it's trying to draw primordial energy up from its gullet, and you roll the dice. You're like, it attacks you with its claws instead. You know, so you're building that tension. So using those spell-like abilities, using recharge abilities, you can do that with any monster, not just a dragon. And that helps, you know, make combat more interesting and more exciting, in my opinion.
There was one dragon I wasn't really paying real close attention during the dragons video. I could have sworn they talked about a dragon who had 2 separate breath weapons.
All the metallics.
All the metallics have 2 that are on separate recharges, though.
Yeah, all the metallics. I think all the metallics, period, but maybe all the adult and ancient. But I think because all the metallics have like defensive and offensive capabilities. Now they're on separate recharges.
That's intense.
Yeah, because if you're fighting one of those, you screwed up. unless we got creative with it. Like,
yeah,
I always have like a metallic bad dragons like in my back pocket in case like things get a little too murder hobo-y for too long. Otherwise, like, I don't include a ton of them because it's like what they kind of addressed that, or they hinted that they're trying to address that, whereas they're giving you more reasons to put metallic dragons into the game. Because there's always a question of like, well, why doesn't this dragon take care of this issue then? Why are we going to go do this? Why am I going to go risk my life when this gets a CR17?
Yeah, so hopefully, you know, they did mention one example of that is like, you know, a gold dragon who's guarding a portal and the players have to get through the portal. And, you know, so how do you persuade the gold dragon to get in through the portal, or do you fight the gold dragon to get through the portal, right? You know, so hopefully there's more good ideas that they're putting in there to help DMs come up with ways to use these monsters in adventures.
All right, guys. Do you have any other further thoughts on the 2024/5 Monster Manual? Get it out now, because after this, we are never discussing this book again.
I go ahead, Ryan.
Just on dragons, the way I balance out dragons is by throwing balance out the window. Like, I will have a ridiculously overpowered dragon swoop down on the party. Maybe it'll fight them till bloodied. Like, this is advanced dungeon mastering. Like, baseline advice: take the dragon out of Thunder Tree, you'll kill everybody. But if you have players who understand the game, smack them around, steal their lunch money, and leave. And now that dragon is going to be just grit in their craw for the next month or 2 or 3 of gaming, and they won't be able to wait to get back there. But in the back of their mind, they know that they can't. Like, an undefeatable enemy, if you do it right, is the best. Is the only way to have like a recurring villain in D&D without like really getting cheesy.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like Mr. Welch's comment. And while you're here, Mr. Welch, I do want to say I love your stuff. I ran a Mystara campaign years ago, and I heavily relied on your video content to do that. So thanks for all those.
Cool.
And I guess my final thoughts on the new Monster Manual is that for me, and I think I've said this before, it's really going to make or break whether or not I play more of 5.5 or D&D 2024. Because good monster design is what makes the game fun for me as a DM, right? Like, all the rest of the fun for me as a DM is based on things that have nothing to do with the system, right? What makes the game fun is all about collaborative storytelling and role playing and creating plots and resolving mysteries and all that sort of stuff. And you can do that with any role-playing game. So whether the real question is whether or not the game system delivers on, the gameplay it's designed to. Does Monster of the Week feel like an episode of a Monster of the Week TV show, right? Does Dungeons and Dragons do a good job of fighting monsters? Because that's what Dungeons and Dragons is really all about. So this Monster Manual is going to make or break it for me, whether or not I spend more time with this version of D&D.
Yep.
So
an awful lot of thirst traps.
That's so funny, because in the back of we were scrolling through that EN World article. I'm like, there's like a big contingent of people who are upset that like the incubus, succubus are not hotter. But to each their own, I guess. Glenn likes the starry form.
Interesting. All right. Well, hey, we're gonna wrap this up. Remember, follow, like, subscribe the Landlocked Warlocks on YouTube, the main home of our streaming. And next week, after the regular show, after Casual Friday next week, we're gonna have a premiere of our most recent actual play, Sexy Battle Wizards. So everybody stick around for that next week. Not today. Today after the show, you can do whatever you want. You have my permission. But next week, you have to stay after to watch the actual play. All right, guys. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to our main topic today. I'm really sorry about that. We will, of course, next week get back to discussing Chapter 2 of the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. All right, so, hey, we're going to get on out of here. I am GM Jim.
I'm Ryan Doyle.
I'm Brad Wolf.
And this is Casual Friday. We're the Landlocked Warlocks. You are you. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you.